Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink, it is time for some PathOfExile discussion. Today I wanted to take a look at 15 days of the solo self-found meta in patch 3.22, what's been doing particularly well, what's been particularly popular this league. While this is very related to the Trade League video that I did, you don't need to have seen that in order to follow this video. A quick recap of the methodology that we'll be using, same as the Trade League video. Grinding Gear Games published the ladder. This is a list of the top 15,000 SSF characters by XP. Now, at the time I'm recording this video, the cutoff to be one of the top 15,000 characters by XP in solo self-found is level 86. So I'm going to limit discussion in this video to level 86 plus characters, even though there is a bit of information available about people who were on the ladder previously, but have since fallen off. Now, this gives an overview of popular build archetypes in the league, and popularity often but not always correlates well with success. The website POE.ninja scrapes this data, and their aggregation got better last league. Now, on Trade League, they're able to follow people who are currently on the ladder, people who have ever been on the ladder, and also people who have been active traders. In solo self-found, it's a little bit harder, and it's pretty much limited to people either who sign up on their website or to people who have been on the ladder at some point. So there's a lot less information available in SSF, especially about people who are not in that top 15,000. Now, game hard modes such as Hardcore and Ruthless constrain builds, and solo self-found is no exception. Interestingly, this league, the Ascendancy Spread is actually very balanced in solo self-found. There's less of a difference between the top Ascendancies and the weakest ones in SSF than there is in Trade. However, when it comes to skills, there is less diversity that's available in SSF, partly because there's less copies of weird uniques going around, and some builds really do feel bad until you get a certain unique. Those builds are generally very underrepresented in solo self-found. Anyways, a quick discussion of the impact of nerfs and buffs. How has this changed since 3.21? Vengeant Cascade was gutted really hard in 3.22. However, this has had minimal impact on the meta. Bow builds are still good enough that if you want to play a bow build, you still play it even without Vengeant Cascade. Bow use is down slightly from 30% to 28%, and of course Vengeant Cascade use has completely disappeared because a new Vengeant Cascade just isn't very good. Other than that, the main changes aren't really a result of balance changes, but changing player preferences. There's a very large number of builds that are viable at this point in PathOfExile, and a lot of people will have a couple of favourites that they might play semi-regularly. They also want to try playing around with a variety of different things as well, and as a result, you do see some shifting even when there's no major buffs or no major nerfs. The top skills are largely the same as last league, although there's a couple of little changes, and the new Guardian Ascendancy has made a splash, but that's really about it in terms of major changes. I did want to point out something that changed a fair bit in Trade League but hasn't really changed much in solo self-found, and that is unique popularity. Over in Trade League, there's been quite a migration away from using Chevron's wrappings and towards using the Fourth Vow. It's really noticeable. These two items are equally rare, but Fourth Vow use is way higher than it was last league. Chevron's wrappings use is way down. However, in solo self-found, you don't really make that choice. You're not choosing between I'm going to build in anticipation of getting Chevron's wrappings and someone else decides I'm going to build in anticipation of getting the Fourth Vow. With these quite rare uniques, sometimes players will decide if one of them drops for them, hey, that's amazing, I'm going to make a build just around that item. Other times people will be like, oh, that's really cool, I'd like to build around that sometime, but I don't have any inspiration to make a new character now. And that's the reason that in solo self-found there's not some wild swing in the popularity of these uniques. Yes, the people who have these rare items will often use them, but there's been no massive change in the number of people with access to these items, and so there hasn't been a major change in the popularity of them either. Finally, a quick note on the impact of tattoos, one of the new league mechanics. In Trade, tattoos render some otherwise marginal items like the Green Nightmare to be incredibly strong. This is much less of an effect in solo self-found because you need to both get the quite rare unique items such as the Green Nightmare or the Red Nightmare or the Blue Nightmare, notice a little pattern here, and then you also need to get a whole lot of the tattoos that work extremely well with it. And that's going to be quite difficult, especially given that all of the Nightmare jewels come from Chayula, and Chayula is definitely not easy to get access to at the moment. Alright, so let's talk about the two Ascendancies that got major overhauls. The Guardian is the 5th most popular Ascendancy in solo self-found this league, and it's overperforming compared to the average. Most players who are running the Guardian are running an Elemental Summon Raging Spirit build. They're using the Guardian's powerful Elemental Relics node, as well as the excellent block node. An Eldritch Battery from the regular passive tree rounds out the core of this build. The 4th Ascendancy notable is something that's much more up in the air. There's less cohesion on what that should be. And there's a bunch of other Guardians as well, but overwhelmingly they are playing minion builds. Guardians are being played with minions because they just work so well together. Now the Chieftain Ascendancy is in 13th place, but it's only a small amount short of being in the top 10 because there's a big pack of Ascendancies that are close together, and Chieftain's second bottom in that pack. So Slayer, Saboteur, Hierophant, Trickster, Chieftain, and Occultist, all of these are close to each other. All of these are Ascendancies that are doing adequately rather than doing overly well. As in trade, it's been noticeable that Hinekora explosions keep going up in popularity on the Ascendancy because they're better than people thought before the league started. Righteous Fire is the top skill for this Ascendancy, but there's a lot of experimentation with other things, melee, detonate dead, and a bit more as well. Now let's have a bit of a discussion of the new support gems that were added in 3.22. The Control Blaze flag is being waved by exactly 3 high-level characters. One of them is playing an interesting looking melee Ignite Elementalist using Rebuke of the Vaal, so they definitely get some style points for that. I think that's a cool build, but you can tell by the fact that only one person is playing it that it's not something that's really caught on. Rebuke of the Vaal is also more common than it used to be. It's been confirmed to be a tier 3 rarity unique, whereas back in Ultimatum the last time it was checked, it was definitely tier 2. And that means that it's been made considerably more common. It's still not a common unique, but it's something that's much more realistic to get your hands on. Even then, not many people are interested in it. Corrupting Cry isn't tearing up the meta, but it is definitely being used well by a bunch of players. Trauma Support is seeing a lot more use in solo self-found than it is over in trade, and that I think comes down to the fact that Trauma Support provides more multiplier to your damage if your base weapon is not as good. So if you're in Trade League and you can get a really good base weapon, then Trauma Support offers you a bit less. Trauma Support is being used a lot on Glacial Hammer Juggernauts, and they're mostly using the unique weapon Frost Breath. Now Frost Breath is tier 4 rarity, which means that there's a good chance you'll have this before you reach level 90. It's in one of the 2 most common tiers of uniques, it's just not all that rare an item. Volatility support is less popular than it is in trade, and I think a big part of that is that Rizlatha's Coil is just such a rare belt, and Rizlatha's Coil is incredibly good in conjunction with Volatility, at least on physical builds. For lightning attack builds, Volatility support can be really good, but for physical attack builds, it's only really good if it's used in conjunction with Rizlatha's Coil, and Rizlatha's Coil is very hard to get your hands on in SSF. Flamewood support may as well not exist, and Guardian's Blessing, while it's popular in Trade League, it's too hard to use well in solo self-found, and so it's not really getting used. Looking at the green gems, Returning Projectiles partially makes up for the loss of Vengeant Cascade. It's very popular at 7% of the meta. I said exactly the same words about it in Trade League as well. Sadism support is more popular than it is in trade, with 14 characters using it. I actually expected 0. There are people trying it out, but it doesn't look like it's tearing up the meta in any way, shape or form. Locust Mine is on exactly 2 characters at the moment. I think that the thing here is that Artillery Ballista is so good that there's no reason to use a clunky skill to do giga damage to bosses. When you can do mega damage with Artillery Ballista and have absolutely no clunk involved, why bother jumping through all the hoops necessary to use Locust Mine when you can just use Artillery Ballista instead and get the job done? Even if it takes a few seconds more to kill a boss, you're not forced to leave a whole bunch of mana unreserved, you're not forced to stand in point blank range of the boss even for a split second. On the blue support gems, over in Trade League, there was exactly 1 high-level character who had Frigid Bond socketed into a gem slot on their character, and I was quite excited and had a look at what they were doing with it. It wasn't actually supporting a link skill, it was just sitting there being leveled. Unlike Trade League, there are 2 people using Frigid Bond, and they are actually using it the way it's intended. It is actually supporting a link skill. These people are undoubtedly using it to connect to one of their minions, and then get all the extra damage that they can out of Frigid Bond. No one seems to have spec'd deeply into it though. People seem to be using it just as a slight extra little bonus on a minion they were clearly already intending to link to. Fresh Meat support has the same niche that it has over in Trade League, Skeleton Mage Necromancer, but it also is being used a fair bit on Vaal Animate Weapon characters as well, and those don't really seem to exist in trade in the same numbers. Vaal Animate Weapon doesn't quite make it onto the list of the top skills being used, but there are a number of people doing it, and many of those people are electing to use Fresh Meat support as well. Sacrifice support, just like I said in trade, it's not popular yet, but give it time. This is the sort of thing that really doesn't work well on a first build. That said, I also don't think it's going to be well suited for solo self-found. It's going to be something that will shine a bit brighter in trade than it does over here. Devour support isn't being used at all, and that should surprise no one. And as in trade, Spellblade support is overwhelmingly being used on Vixen's Entrapment Impending Doom builds with the Breath of the Council unique Scepter. This is in a lot of ways the best case scenario for Spellblade support. The Breath of the Council unique Scepter is simultaneously a pretty hard hitting weapon and also a reasonably good caster stick for Impending Doom builds, and it's also not competing with sources of increased gem levels. If you have, say, a Scepter with +1 to all gem levels, this is actually only skill gems, And so if you've got Impending Doom that is supporting Temporal Chains, this is going to increase the effect of that Temporal Chains curse, which is nice and all, but it's not worth a Precious Weapon Prefix mod because it is not boosting Impending Doom's gem level, because Impending Doom is a support gem, not a skill gem. So for that reason, Impending Doom builds generally like Spellblade support in conjunction with Breath of the Council. Breath of the Council isn't particularly rare, Vixen's Entrapment is a bit rarer, but once people have got that, they'll often consider rolling into this in solo self-found. Okay, so let's have a look at the Ascendancy Spread here. The 7 least played Ascendancies you'll see that we've merged together into one slice of pie on the left side, and then split them out into a new chart. Deadeye is on top like it is in trade, but it's far less popular in solo self-found than it is in trade. And a big part of this is that the Ascendancy feels worse at low gear level than most do, and it can really struggle with a couple of major progression bosses like your Voidstone bosses. In trade, you can just jump over that milestone with a boss carry service, even if doing so does cost you a bit of currency. In solo self-found, that is flat out not an option. If you want that boss dead, you've got to kill it yourself. And that leads some players to be a little bit hesitant about rolling up a Deadeye, especially as the first character of the league, because they're just not certain that they're going to be able to get over those milestones, especially the harder two, Maven and Uber Elder. It's really noticeable that Juggernaut, Elementalist, and Champion absolutely excel in solo self-found. All of these Ascendancies are massively more represented here than they are over in trade, and that's because they get a lot of their survivability in the case of Juggernaut and Champion, or their damage or damage projection in the case of Elementalist, from skill gems, from gem levels, and occasionally from relatively reasonably farmable unique items. As always, the Scion Ascendant does particularly poorly in solo self-found. This is because the Scion has more access to jewel slots, and that's actually part of the class's power budget. But in solo self-found, the jewels that you've got access to are going to be weaker than the ones you'd have access to in trade. And so you don't really have access to the tools that allows this Ascendancy to shine so brightly over in Trade League. The Trickster Ascendancy is pretty unpopular right now in solo self-found compared to its power, and I do expect that to change as more players gain access to the unique item Heat Shiver. Juggernaut, Glacial Hammer, and Trickster Frostblades absolutely love that unique, and among people who are equipping Heat Shiver, these are the 2 top Ascendancies to choose. It's just that a lot of people don't have a specific tier 3 unique yet. However, it becomes a very different story if we laser focus in on just the most successful characters, those that have made it to level 98, 99, or 100. In solo self-found, this is a pretty elite club. There's less than 500 people who are level 98 or above. Of those, 1/3 of them are Deadeyes. This is a very, very low level of build diversity, contrasting with the much higher level that exists between levels 86 and 97. What I think this shows is that once you get past the Maven, once you get past Uber Elder on your Deadeye, there's pretty much nothing stopping you. The world is your oyster, and most of the players who want to clear really fast and potentially make a push to 100 in SSF, those people are very strongly pulled into selecting the Deadeye because it's in such a strong place once you get past those milestone encounters. So what's in top position in solo self-found when we look at skills? It is Boneshatter. 70% of people are playing Juggernaut, 28% are playing Slayer, and there's a small number playing other Ascendancies. This has an 11% meta share at the moment. Almost universally, people who are running this build start out with Sinvictor's Medal if they own it, but then they migrate pretty quickly to a well-rolled two-handed rare axe. On the Juggernaut version, Tanu Ahi is an incredibly good set of gloves. This is quite a common unique item, and as a result, it grants a huge amount of power to the Juggernaut, who can use it better than the Slayer can. Slayer can't really use Tanu Ahi well at all. Carnage Heart, on the other hand, is great on both builds, and it's even better on the Slayer version, and again, Carnage Heart is one of the most common uniques in the game now. Divergent Boneshatter is great in trade, but it's really hard to make it work in solo self-found. There's not many people running Divergent Boneshatter in SSF right now at all. This is still number 1, down slightly in popularity on Crucible League, but it is still more dominant than any skill is in the Trade League. And this is what we're talking about with how solo self-found tends to have less skill diversity, and usually has less diversity in Ascendancies as well. This league is a bit unusual in that the Ascendancy balance is a bit closer in SSF, but the skill balance is definitely less so, and Boneshatter is head and shoulders above everything else. In second place at 8% of meta share, we have Summon Raging Spirits. This is a build that's been very popular at various points in the game's history and had a real resurgence in 3.20 Sanctum League. Now, the Necromancer version of SRS is often built around poison, but it's the Guardian version that's been popular this league. This is the one with a surge in popularity in SSF, and the Guardian version generally does elemental instant application damage. None of this DOT stuff, just have your minions do the damage right now instead. There is a very, very good target farmable unique item that comes from Abyss content, the Darkness Enthroned unique belt, and this is very popular on this build for solo self-found. for both versions, both the poison version, which is usually a necromancer, and the elemental instant damage version, which is usually a guardian. Righteous Fire takes third place at the moment. Now there's more experimentation with the Chieftain Ascendancy in solo self-found than there is in trade, although it's solidly Inquisitor first, Juggernaut second, and Chieftain third. Elementalist is way less popular in solo self-found for Righteous Fire, and a big part of this is that you're somewhat locked out of the unique items that give the Elementalist Righteous Fire builds their tremendous damage projection. For Righteous Fire to feel really good with an Elementalist, you generally need either Oriath's End or a large number of tattoos of the Namahu Warmonger. Neither of these is a small ask, and as a result, I expect the Elementalist to continue to be the least popular Ascendancy that sees some play for Righteous Fire. Explosive Arrow Ballista comes in next. This is a tried and tested performer, it's been good for many leagues, and it's the top of the bow builds, but by a slightest of margins. This plays very differently to other bow builds. It has a long delay between player action and monster death, and that can be pretty awkward when it comes to looting, but it makes up for this weakness by being incredibly safe. The critical gear that this build needs to get going is very target farmable. You can target farm Porcupine Divination cards, you can target farm Shrieking Essences of Dread. That is all you need in order to begin with this build. And the champion is the top ascendancy for this build in solo self-found, but there's plenty of diversity there. Lightning Arrow comes in next, only a tiny sliver behind the Explosive Arrow Ballista people. This is the best of the bow builds. It's overwhelmingly played on Deadeye for very good reason. Deadeye is incredibly good right now. And this build usually makes up for its poor single target damage by using Artillery Ballista, which then deals with the bosses for you so that you don't have to yourself. Ignite Detonate Dead Elementalist comes in next, and this just does a lot of damage on complete trash gear. This makes it excellent at killing bosses, and because it's Ignite, it has reasonably good damage proliferation as well, especially once you get your hands on the unique wand Obliteration, which is also one of the most common unique items in the game. Very accessible, and that helps make this a really solid starter choice. And rounding out some of the other skills that people are using quite a bit, Tornado Shot, Hex Blast Mines, the cold damage over time archetype that revolves around Vortex and similar skills, sometimes Wintertide Brand, sometimes Creeping Frost, Toxic Rain, Frostblades, Impending Doom, Skeleton Mages, and Self-Cast Spark Inquisitor. These round out the rest of the standout performers. All of these are quite a bit lower than the ones that we mentioned separately, but they're all worth considering as well. And a final note on some of the unique items that have been a little bit of a breakout in this league. Hyrri's Truth is seeing a lot more use than it's seen in recent leagues. This was only being used on 2% of high level characters last league, now it's on 5%, and this makes it the second most commonly equipped unique on level 86 plus characters, behind only Immortal Flesh, which is a belt that's very diversely applicable and also just very common. Use of the Taming is also way up. It's not super hard to get this ring, but it's not easy either because you need to vendor a Beric's Respite, which is a tier 3 rarity unique, in order to get a copy of the Taming. You also need Beric's Pass and Beric's Grip, but they're much more common than Beric's Respite is. I've also noticed a big increase in use of Dyadian Dawn. I'm curious here, I kind of suspect that this item may have been made more common than it's been in the past. It was definitely tier 3 rarity in patch 3.21. There's been people who've done some extensive farming to test that, but I suspect that it might be tier 4 now, and tier 4 is a lot more common than tier 3. So tier 3 is Cold Iron Point, tier 4 is Goldrum. That should give you a sense as to just how big the gulf is between these two tiers of rarity. And whilst I'm not absolutely certain that Dyadian Dawn has been made more common, it would explain a few things. If it does turn out that Dyadian Dawn was indeed made more common in patch 3.22, then this would be another incentive to running Explosive Arrow Ballista, as one of the really powerful luxury upgrades for that build is now something that's more accessible. All that said, I will just be clear that it is still at the level of speculation. We have not yet proven that Dyadian Dawn is more common, it just is starting to look that way. Anyways, that is the day 15 meta overview for solo self-found. If you want to catch the day 10 version for Trade League, I'll put a link to that down in the bottom left corner of your screen now, so you can have a look at that if you're interested. Otherwise, I'm going to leave it there. May your Varlobs have interesting results, and I will see you around.